My name is Alec Rose, and I never thought I would tell this story out loud. For a long time, I kept it buried deep inside of me, hidden under smiles, routines, and the quiet silence that comes from being the kind of woman who always gives more than she takes. But the truth is, this story still haunts me, and I know it will never leave me. Maybe telling it, maybe letting someone else hear it, will finally help me breathe again. It all began on a night that was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life, our 20th wedding anniversary. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of believing in us. I had been counting down the days, telling myself that even though we had weathered struggles and arguments, and the years that sometimes made us feel like strangers, this night would bring us back to what we once were. It was supposed to be our chance to remember who we were together. I spent the afternoon preparing myself in a way I hadn't in years. I slipped into a dress that had been tucked away in my closet, one I had saved for a special moment like this. I curled my hair, painted my lips, and when I looked in the mirror, for the first time in a long time, I saw a younger version of me staring back. A woman who used to dream. A woman who once believed she was seen. I was nervous, almost like a girl waiting for her first date. My hands shook as I fastened the necklace he once gave me, a simple chain with a tiny heart, and I whispered to myself that this night would be different. He would look at me the way he used to. He would remember. He would love me again, not the way you love someone out of habit, but with the fire of the beginning. When we arrived at the restaurant, the lights were low, the music soft, and the air was warm with laughter and clinking glasses. I tried to hold on to the moment, to let it feel magical, even as a strange arsiness flickered inside me. He seemed distracted. He smiled politely, but his eyes kept wandering across the room, as if searching for something that wasn't there. I asked about his day, about work, about plans we might make. His answers were short, his tone clipped, almost as if he wished the questions would stop. Still, I tried. I kept telling myself maybe he was tired, maybe he was nervous too, maybe he just needed time to settle into the evening. But as I reached for his hand across the table, he pulled back ever so slightly. And in that moment, the small ache in my chest grew sharper. The waiter poured wine, and I raised my glass to toast. To us, I whispered, my voice trembling with hope. He clinked his glass against mine, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He took a sip, set the glass down, and then he leaned closer. What he said next is burned into my memory like fire. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as though he had practiced it. He looked at me and said, "You're just a housewife. I want to live again." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The words felt impossible, unreal, like a cruel trick my mind was playing. But no. He repeated them. He said them with the certainty of a man who had already decided, who had already rehearsed this moment, and now he was simply delivering the sentence. The world around me went quiet. I could still see people laughing at nearby tables, hear forks against plates, but it all sounded muffled, distant, as though I had been dropped into another world. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst. 20 years of my life, gone in a single breath. All the nights I stayed awake with sick children while he slept. All the mornings I woke early to pack lunches, to make sure he had a clean shirt, to carry the invisible weight of a household while he built his career. Every dream I had set aside because read his dreams mattered more. And now, after all of it, he reduced me to nothing more than just a housewife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand how he could be so cruel, how he could sit across from me and cut me open like that while strangers ate their dinners a few feet away. But no words came out. My throat locked, my hands shook beneath the table, and the tears that burned behind my eyes refused to fall. Not here, not in front of them. He didn't stop. He spoke of feeling trapped, of needing freedom, of wanting something more than the life we had built together. He spoke as though I was the reason he was suffocating, as though the years I had given him were chains instead of love. And the way he said it, with such calmness, with such relief, it was as if he believed he was freeing himself by destroying me. I sat there, silent, broken, while he lifted his glass again and drank as though he had simply ordered another wine, as though he hadn't just ended the life I thought we shared. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I didn't know it then, but that night would change me forever. It was the night I realized that love, as I had known it, could be taken from you in an instant. That loyalty and sacrifice don't always mean you'll be valued. That sometimes the person you trust the most is the very one who will betray you. I didn't cry there. I didn't collapse in front of him. I held my head high, swallowed my pain, and told myself I would make it through dinner. But deep inside, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. And that was just the beginning. When the waiter set down our plates, I stared at mine as though it didn't belong to me. The steam rose. The scent of garlic and butter filled the air, and I could hear him cutting into his steak like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just dismantled my entire world with a single sentence. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to run, but I stayed. I sat there with my fork in my hand, pretending to eat, nodding occasionally when he spoke, as though I was still part of the conversation. Inside, I was screaming. Every sound in the restaurant felt amplified. The laughter from the couple behind me, the scrape of silverware on porcelain, the clink of glasses. Each sound was a reminder that no one else knew what was happening at our table. To the outside world, we looked like a normal couple celebrating 20 years of marriage. Only I knew that I was sitting across from a stranger. I tried to think of our children. I tried to imagine their faces, to draw strength from the thought of them, but instead, guilt clawed at me. What would this mean for them? If their father truly wanted to live again, what would happen to the life we had given them? Would they grow up believing that I wasn't enough? That I had failed? I forced myself to stay still, to hold back tears, but my hands trembled on the table. He noticed, but he didn't care. Or maybe he cared too little to ask. He just kept talking, words spilling out like a confession he had been waiting years to give. He spoke about feeling trapped, about wanting more adventure, more freedom. He said it in such a way that made me feel like I was a prison guard instead of a partner. And then, the cruelest part, he smiled. A small, satisfied smile, the kind people wear when they've unburdened themselves. That smile broke something in me. It wasn't regret, it wasn't pain, it was relief. Relief that he had finally told me the truth, even though that truth destroyed me. I don't remember how I got through the rest of that dinner. I don't remember tasting the food or even swallowing it. All I remember is staring at the tablecloth, counting the patterns in the fabric to keep myself from breaking apart in front of everyone. My body was there, but my spirit was collapsing. When the check came, he signed it quickly, not even glancing at me, as though the night had been nothing more than another routine outing. He stood, pushed in his chair, and started walking toward the door. And I, like someone moving in a dream, stood too. My legs felt like lead, my chest was tight, but I followed him out of the restaurant. The night air hit me like a wave. Cool, sharp, unforgiving. I wanted to breathe deeply, to let it clear my head, but my lungs refused to open. We walked silently to the car, the sound of his shoes steady on the pavement, mine stumbling behind. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't look back. He just walked. When we got into the car, the silence grew heavier. He turned the engine on, the headlights cutting across the dark road, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stared out the window, watching the lights blur, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. But then it came, sudden and uncontrollable. The first sob. Quiet at first, but then louder. I tried to cover my mouth, but the sound escaped anyway. And he didn't say a word. He kept driving. Not a hand on my shoulder, not a whisper of comfort, not even a glance. Nothing. The man I had spent 20 years with, the man I thought was my partner, drove home as though I wasn't even there. That silence was worse than the words. His indifference cut deeper than any insult, because it told me everything I needed to know. He was done. He had already left me, even if his body still sat in the driver's seat beside me. When we pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in front of me, a place that had once been my safe haven. But that night, it looked like a prison. Every window, every brick, every memory inside those walls reminded me of what I had given and what had just been taken from me. I walked inside, numb. The children were at a friend's house for the night, so the silence was suffocating. I wanted to collapse on the floor and let the pain consume me, but something inside of me refused. I went upstairs, peeled off the dress I had worn with such hope, and stood in front of the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked, and with tears, her shoulders slumped with the weight of 20 years. But beneath that broken face, I saw something else. Something faint, but alive. Anger. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that burns quietly, refusing to be extinguished. That night, as I lay in bed beside the man who had betrayed me, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I would not let his words be the end of me. I would not be just anything. And yet, even as I made that promise, fear gnawed at me. How could I rebuild after 20 years of giving myself away? How could I find myself again when I wasn't even sure who I was anymore? The questions kept me awake, my heart pounding, my mind racing. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a battle I never wanted but could no longer avoid. Because once you hear words like that, once you feel the ground pulled from under you, there is no going back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside the window, their chirping light and careless, as if the world hadn't fallen apart just hours before. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and painted the room gold, but to me, it felt cold. I turned my head and looked at him lying beside me. His chest rose and fell with each slow breath, his face calm, peaceful, untouched by the storm he had unleashed the night before. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to scream in his ear. How can you sleep? How can you rest so easily when I haven't closed my eyes all night, when my heart has been breaking in silence? But I didn't. I stayed still, staring at him, and I realized something chilling. He wasn't losing sleep over this. He wasn't worried about me, about us, about the destruction his words had caused. No, he was free. He had said what he wanted to say, and now the burden was gone. At least for all, Kim. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and went downstairs. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and it pressed down on me like a weight. I made myself a cup of coffee, but when I brought it to my lips, the bitterness was unbearable. I poured it down the sink and stood there, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. 20 years. 20 years of building a life together. 20 years of believing in us. And now, what was I left with? A husband who saw me as nothing more than a shadow, a role, a title. Just a housewife. Those words echoed in my mind again and again, and the more I thought about them, the angrier I became. Because it wasn't only him who had made me feel this way, it was the world around me too. People praised him for his career, his success, his accomplishments. And me? I was always the wife, the one who stayed home, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly so that he could shine. My sacrifices were invisible. My identity was erased in silence. I thought about the countless times I had wanted to pursue something of my own, the classes I wanted to take, the job I wanted to try, the small business idea I once had. I thought about how every time I told myself, maybe later, maybe when the kids are older, maybe when he doesn't need me as much. And later never came. As I stood there in the kitchen, the truth hit me like a blow. I had given up so much of myself for this life, for this marriage, only to be told it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. And for the first time, I let myself ask a question I had been too afraid to whisper before. Who am I, if I'm not his wife? The thought terrified me. I didn't have an answer. The kids came home that afternoon, running through the door with laughter and stories from their night away. I smiled. I hugged them. I asked about their adventures, all while hiding the storm raging inside me. I didn't want them to see. I didn't want them to carry the weight of what their father had done. But even as I played the role of the Fahan, loving mother, I could feel myself slipping, piece by piece. That evening, he acted as though nothing had happened. He sat at the table, ate dinner, watched television, and made small talk with the children. Not once did he look at me with remorse. Not once did he acknowledge the words that had shattered me, and that silence was louder than any argument could have been. When I finally went upstairs, I locked the bathroom door and sank to the floor. My chest heaved, sobs ripping through me until I could barely breathe. I pressed my hand against my mouth, muffling the sound so no one would hear. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had before. But then, as the tears slowed, another thought began to rise. A dangerous, daring thought. What if this was my chance? What if his cruelty was the push I needed to finally reclaim myself? The idea scared me as much as it excited me, because I had no idea where to begin. I had spent 2 decades being the glue that held everything together. I didn't know how to live for myself anymore. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. If I did, I would disappear completely. I looked at myself in the mirror that night. My face was swollen, my eyes red. But behind the pain, I saw something fierce flickering, a spark. And I promised myself that I wouldn't let it go out. I didn't know yet how to fight. I didn't know what steps I would take. But I knew this. I would not let his words define me. I would not be just anything. Still, the fear lingered. Could I really do it? Could I really rebuild a life for myself after 20 years of being someone else's support system? Or was I already too broken, too far gone to ever find myself again? Those questions kept me awake for many nights. And little did I know, the days ahead would bring challenges I could never have imagined. Moments that would test me. Moments that would force me to confront not only his betrayal, but the quiet, insidious injustice that had shaped my entire life. Because this wasn't just about a marriage ending. It was about a woman waking up to the truth she had ignored for far too long. And once you wake up, there's no going back to sleep. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm without an umbrella. Every morning, I woke up next to him, the man who had once promised me forever, and the silence between us grew thicker, heavier, almost unbearable. He didn't repeat the words he had said at the restaurant, but he didn't take them back either. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge them. And that somehow made it worse. It was as if he had dropped a bomb in the middle of my life and then calmly walked away, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. I carried on with the routines because that's what I had always done. Breakfast for the kids, laundry in the washer, groceries from the store, smiles where they were needed, silence where they were safer. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were still a family. But inside, I was unraveling. Every time I folded his shirts or set a plate in front of him, I heard his voice in my head again. "You're just a housewife. I want to live again." The injustice of it consumed me. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, the jobs I didn't take, the nights I stayed up worrying about bills, the dreams I quietly buried so his could flourish. He got to live. He got to chase ambition, be admired, be respected. And me, I was expected to disappear into the background, to carry everyone else's needs until my own no longer existed. And then, when he was finished with the life I had built for him, he had the audacity to call me just. But anger can be fuel, and slowly, I began to let it burn. I didn't make a grand announcement. I didn't shout it from the rooftops. But inside, I started to change. The first step was the library. I hadn't set foot in one in years, not for myself anyway. I had taken the kids countless times, when they were younger, watching them run their fingers along the spines of books, listening to their laughter as they piled stories into their arms. But this time, I went alone. I walked down the aisles slowly, breathing in the smell of old pages, feeling something awaken in me. I picked up books I had once loved, books on subjects I had once dreamed of studying. And as I stood there with the weight of a novel in my hands, I felt something I hadn't in years. Possibility. From that day forward, I carved out time, little pieces of the day that belonged only to me. I read. I wrote notes. I allowed myself to think about things beyond the walls of my house. And it felt rebellious, almost dangerous, like I was taking back something that had been stolen from me. Of course, he noticed. One evening, he asked, with a hint of irritation, "Why are you always reading lately? Don't you have things to do?" The way he said it, sharp and dismissive, made my stomach twist. But instead of apologizing, instead of shrinking the way I used to, I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, I do, and this is one of them." The shock on his face was almost satisfying. For a moment, he had no words, and I realized something important. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. He wasn't used to me having a voice. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of strength. But strength comes with its own cost, because once you start to see yourself differently, you can't unsee the truth. I began to notice how often my contributions were dismissed, not only by him but by others. The neighbor who once asked, "Do you do anything, or do you just stay home?" The friend who said, "You're so lucky you don't have to work." The casual comments that stung, the little dismissals that chipped away at me. I had laughed them off at the time, but now, looking back, I realized how deep the wound really went. It wasn't just my husband who didn't see me. It was a world that had been trained to overlook women like me. Women who held families together in silence, who gave up pieces of themselves so others could shine. We were the invisible ones, the justs, and it made me furious. That fury built inside me, and it began to change the way I moved through my days. I stopped apologizing when dinner was late. I stopped rushing to pick up his clothes from the floor. I stopped biting my tongue when his words cut me. Each small act of resistance was a brick in the wall I was building between who I had been and who I was becoming. But with every step forward, I also felt fear. Because change is never easy. The man beside me didn't like the woman who was beginning to emerge. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way his voice hardened when I didn't fold back into silence. And sometimes, late at night, when the children were asleep and the house was still, I would ask myself, was I strong enough to keep going? Was I brave enough to fight for a life of my own? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the path I was on was no longer sustainable. Something had to break, either me or the life we had built together. And deep down, I already knew which one it would be. The night it finally broke was nothing special at first. There was no anniversary dinner, no dramatic setting, just an ordinary Tuesday. I had made pasta, simple, because the day had been long. The kids had homework scattered across the table, and I was tired, so tired, but still moving, because that's what I always did. He walked in late, the smell of cologne trailing behind him, and something about that scent made my stomach turn. It was the kind of cologne he never wore for me, the kind you wear to feel new, to feel alive. He barely looked at me as he sat down, and when he did, it wasn't with warmth, it was with impatience. "Pasta again?" he muttered, pushing the food around his plate. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary complaint, but in that moment, it felt like the final crack in the foundation. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I was done. Done bending, done breaking myself to keep someone else comfortable, done being invisible in the life I had built with my own hands. The words came out before I could stop them. "If pasta isn't enough for you, maybe you should find someone else to cook for you." The silence that followed was sharp, heavy, cutting through the noise of the kids and the clatter of forks. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him, and maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. "What did you say?" His voice was low, dangerous. I felt my hands tremble, but I didn't back down. "You heard me." That night, when the children were asleep, the fight came. Not with fists, but with words sharper than any blade. He accused me of changing, of becoming bitter, of forgetting my place. And I, for the first time, let out everything I had been swallowing for 20 years. Every sacrifice, every dream buried, every insult disguised as love. The walls shook with the force of our words, and when it was done, there was nothing left between us but ashes. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, my body trembling, but my spirit strangely calm, because I knew something had ended, and when endings come, so do beginnings. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not everything, just enough. A few clothes, my favorite books, a photo of the kids. My hands shook as I zipped it up, but inside, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years. He watched me, silent, as I walked to the door. For once, he didn't try to stop me. Maybe he didn't believe I would actually go. Maybe he thought I'd be back. But I wasn't coming back. Walking out that door was the hardest thing I had ever done. My heart ached for the children, for the home I had built with my bare hands, for the version of me who had once believed in forever. But I knew I couldn't stay, not, and survive. The world outside was colder than I remembered. The air bit at my cheeks, and the sky was heavy with clouds. But for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. Every step away from that house was a step toward myself. The weeks that followed were a blur of chaos and clarity. There were tears, so many tears. Nights I cried into a pillow. Mornings I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But there were also moments of joy, quiet and unexpected. The first time I sat in a cafe alone with a notebook. The first time I bought groceries only for myself. The first time I woke up without feeling like I owed the world every piece of me. I rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. I found part-time work at the library, of all places, surrounded by books that reminded me who I was beyond the label of housewife. I met women who had stories like mine, different details, same pain. And in their voices, I heard my own strength echo back to me. And the children, they saw more than I wanted them to, but they also understood more than I gave them credit for. One night, my daughter crawled into bed with me and whispered, "Mom, I'm proud of you." I cried harder than I ever had before. Because that was it. That was the reason I had to keep going. So she would never think her worth could be defined by anyone else's words. Looking back now, I see that night at the restaurant for what it was. Not the end of my story, but the beginning. His words cut me deeply, yes, but they also woke me up. They forced me to see the truth I had been ignoring for years. That I wasn't just anything, that none of us are. And maybe that's the part that matters most. This isn't only about me, or him, or even our marriage. It's about every woman who has ever been told she is just something, just a wife, just a mother, just a role. It's about every sacrifice that goes unseen, every voice that goes unheard, every life that is diminished by a single careless word. I walked away that night, not because I stopped being a wife, but because I started being myself again. And that is worth more than any title, any role, any empty promise of love. So I'll leave you with this. How many more women will hear those words, "You're just," before the world finally learns to see us? How many more stories like mine will it take before we understand that there is no just? Because I'm not just a housewife, I'm Alec Rose, and this is my story.
Think about it. Could this happen to you? Some stories aren't just heard, they're felt. Behind every truth, there's a hidden fear. This story won't just shake your mind, it'll haunt your soul. Who could imagine the truth would be this terrifying? The story ends, but the questions stay alive.